Jewish Geography Podcast. I'm your host, Eitan Levy, and this is the Hanukkah episode. For the most part, I'm going to be turning this episode over to my wife, Daniela, who writes a really wonderful blog, Letters to Josep. And I was writing my own piece yesterday that I was going to read for the podcast, and I read her piece that she posted, and I was just blown away. It was so much better than what I was going to say. I decided to turn over the opening monologue to her. So we're going to go ahead and jump into that. Here you go. Here's Daniela.
Hanukkah is the most famous of Jewish holidays, but it is actually a minor rabbinical holiday of less importance than most of the other Jewish holidays. So why is it so well known, you wonder? One word: Christmas. Many cultures have a holiday around this time of year. Skeptics would say this is a remnant of ancient pagan celebrations of the winter solstice. I would say there is something about this time of year that people are drawn to. When the darkness is greatest, we are most compelled to search for the light. So what is the darkness that the Jews encountered that compelled us to find the light of Hanukkah? You've probably heard this story before, so I'll be brief. The story of Hanukkah goes that during the Hellenistic period, the Greek ruler over Judea made laws that were increasingly anti-Jewish and oppressive, banning circumcision and kosher slaughter, institutionalizing idol worship, and defiling the Holy Temple. A motley band of Jewish fighters, the Maccabees, rebelled against the Greeks, and in a series of miraculous battles won back Jewish sovereignty over the land and over Jerusalem, and were able to restore the temple and rededicate it to the service of God. The word Hanukkah means dedication. But the story goes, there was one problem. When searching for pure oil to use to light the menorah, the 7-branched candelabra that burned constantly in the temple, they were only able to find one small bottle, enough oil to burn for one day. It would take 8 days to acquire a new supply of pure oil. The miracle of Hanukkah is that after they lit the menorah, expecting it to go out after one day, it burned and burned and burned for all 8 days. That is why we light the 9-branched Chanukiah, or menorah, for Hanukkah, one candle for each day, and one with which to light the others. We start with one candle on the first day and add a candle every night until there are 8. On the surface, we've got a nice David and Goliath style story here of an unlikely military victory, plus a nice little miracle that has to do with the lamp. But what is the real light here, and what is the real darkness? Is the darkness the oppression of the Greeks, and the light of the menorah and the temple? Or is there something else to this story? Let's zoom in a little on the period before the Maccabees. If you were picturing the Jews looking on in horror while the Greeks went about their hedonistic shenanigans, think again. As you full well know, Greek culture was not just about oppressing Jews. It was an incredibly powerful and advanced culture with superior science, philosophy, and technology, and there was a lot that was attractive about it. Western culture as we know it today is built on the marriage between Greek culture and the Judeo-Christian values. And Jews have always liked to be on top of the latest and greatest progress in the world, so many Jews embraced the Greek culture and adopted it as their own and began to shed their Jewishness. They agreed with the Greeks, who scorned Judaism as being primitive, backwards, and irrelevant. It was time to move forward in the world and become part of real progress instead of clinging to their tragic past and the covenant with God that their forefathers had broken. Does this sound familiar in any way? If I asked you what the greatest danger to Judaism is and has been throughout history, you might answer oppression, hatred, and anti-Semitism. I beg to differ. The greatest danger to Judaism is assimilation. Assimilation means losing sight of what it is that makes us special. It means losing sight of our purpose, our essence, our unique contribution to the world. It means allowing our unique voice to be swallowed up into the cacophony and confusion of humanity's global conversation. Assimilation is darkness. God said, "Let there be light." We believe that God created humans to elevate the world to a higher spiritual place, and we believe that God chose us as a nation to guide our fellow humans to that place, to be a light unto the nations. See where I'm going with this? The real darkness in the story of Hanukkah was not the external force of the Greeks' oppression. The real darkness was doubt. Doubt that our identity, our message, our traditions had anything to say to the Greeks. Doubt that they had any importance in the grand scheme of things. And the light was more than just the menorah that quietly burned 8 times as long as it should have. The light was the essence of the Jewish people, which has survived 100 times as long as it should have, which has refused to be extinguished despite the sound and fury of hundreds of cultures that swept the world only to fade over time. But our light never faded. It burned and burned and burned. And in the midst of it all, the Torah is the candle for our feet, the light to our path, to slightly paraphrase Psalms 119, 105, whispering in our ears the truth that God spoke to us in Mount Sinai. The Torah is the pillar of fire that continues to lead us through the desert to the promised land. And as more and more Jews see no reason to hold on to the faith of their ancestors and their children and grandchildren lose all connection to that past, it is more important than ever to emphasize this message of Hanukkah. There is something special about you and the people you come from, something that God gave you, making you who you are and giving you the unique mission only you can complete. That is your light. Own it. And here, I'd like to mention this wonderful whiteboard animation video by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, because I think that piece speaks to this point really precisely. And here's just one quote from this really wonderful video that he made. I admire other civilizations and traditions and believe each has brought something special into the world. Aval zeh shelanu, but this is ours. This is my people, my heritage, my faith. In our uniqueness lies our universality. Through being what we alone are, we give to humanity what only we can give. On that note, I wish you a holiday and indeed a life, full of light, full of the truth within you, and I pray that you will never be afraid to own your light and let it shine on everyone around you.
We're back here with Daniela, my wife, Daniela Levy, the Rabbanit Levy, Rebbitzin Levy. She's giggling in shame over here. I wanted to ask, this episode is about Hanukkah specifically, and you said something the other day to me that I wanted you to explore a little bit. First of all, we have to introduce you a little bit to what happens in kindergartens in Israel, the kindergarten culture in Israel. It's very specific, and sort of every kindergarten has these certain things that they do based around the Jewish calendar. And one of those things is they have a party.
Yes, the Hanukkah party.
Yeah. And
the dreaded Hanukkah party.
The dreaded Hanukkah party. This is the part where we would both cross ourselves if we were Catholics.
Yes.
And kindergarten, it's called gan in Hebrew, which is literally the word for garden. So it's called a gan party, and usually the mothers come to the party and they do sort of a little show or sing a song or dance or something with the teacher, and they do some sort of arts project.
And then we eat sufganiyot and we go home.
And we eat sufganiyot, these kind of jelly-filled donuts that are a very Israeli Hanukkah food. And then we all go home happy. And when you came home from one of the kids' parties, you were telling me something that was felt really special about the way our kids gan talks about Hanukkah.
Yeah, I also wrote about this in a post that I made last week about, signs that Hanukkah is coming. And one of the items on there was the preschool Hanukkah party. And I wrote about how what I appreciate about our particular preschool is that they tend to focus more on the Bet HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, and its role in the Hanukkah story, as opposed to, the Maccabees and the fight against the Greeks, because it's more centered around, we're going to build the Holy Temple, and the important part of the story is the temple, where I think that in most other places, the story is more about, okay, well, you have the menorah, and you have the miracle of the lamp, and you have the Greeks and stuff, but we don't talk so much about the temple, and the fact that the temple is really what's central to this story. That the temple is what the Maccabees were trying to redeem and to rededicate. I mean, the story of Hanukkah, the word Hanukkah is talking about the rededication of the temple.
Right. The word Hanukkah literally means dedication.
Yeah.
As in the dedication of a building. Because Hanukkah is one of the most popular Jewish holidays among Jews of all different stripes, not just the Orthodox, like ourselves, at least in America, it has all these different views of it that are out there. Every little community has their own little view, like the old Zionist propaganda, secular Zionist propaganda, from 70 years ago, was only focused on sort of the military victory. And there's
the strong Jew.
The strong Jew fighting against the Greeks, and there's this song about how not by the hand of God, but by our own strength, sort of a direct and intentional reversal of the traditional view of the Hanukkah story. And then in the ultra-Orthodox communities, it's hyper-focused on the miracle of the candles and the laws around that, and sort of the spiritual intensity of fighting against Greekness. And it seems like what you're getting at has something to do with focusing on what's being built a lot more than what's being fought against. Do you think that sounds like an accurate description?
Yeah, I think it's not just what is being built, but what are our goals? Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And I think that a lot of people use the story of Hanukkah to talk about religious freedom. And I think it is about religious freedom, but the story of Hanukkah specifically is about Jewish religious freedom and about the freedom...
Which is communal.
Right, which is communal and has to do with worshiping at the temple, which was the center of our religion for a very long time. And the transition from being a temple-centered religion to one that was around the study of Torah and the synagogue is something that it was an adaptation that we had to make after the destruction of the Second Temple, and it's not to be taken for granted. It's part of our religion, but really, in the ideal, our religion is supposed to be about the temple.
You said something interesting there. You said that this is about religious freedom in a way, but it's also about Jewish religious freedom in particular. And I think that's something that's really deep about Judaism in general, and also about Hanukkah in particular, is it's both particularist and universalist at the same time. And for instance, we don't insist that everybody be Jewish. There's no Jewish view that everyone in the world will ever be Jewish. The idea is that, that we're a nation of priests among nations, and what we are servicing, our flock, is the entire world, who, it's fine. They remain Gentiles and good, holy people, and serve God in their way within certain boundaries. And that's great. But there has to be some particular there of someone standing up and showing a particular way forward, or otherwise you just get kind of this mushy feel good.
Everybody does what they want.
Everybody does what they want.
As long as they don't bother anybody else.
Which is certainly not the worst way to be in the world, but it's not a way of striving towards God, which is what Judaism is about. It's about bringing God into the world. And you brought this out really well in your letter that you read, the letter to Joseph, that it's about bringing this light out to the world. But to bring the light out to the world, first you have to kindle the light.
Yes, and you have to know what the light is that you're bringing.
Right.
And you have to believe that it's something that the world needs and that it's your job to transmit it.
Right. That you have to know what the light is. That's a really funny thing. It makes me think of like a lot of the time when you and I are talking to friends who are Christian, there tends to be, at least outside of very academic Catholic circles, there tends to be a very sort of loose usage of terminology about a lot of things.
Like the word fasting, for example.
How do you mean?
For Jews and Muslims, fasting means we refrain from eating and drinking. It's a very specific, okay? This is what we do. We don't eat, we don't drink.
Right. No food, no liquid passes your lips.
Right. For Christians, it's like, well, you don't eat certain kinds of foods, or you refrain from a certain kind of eating for a certain period, or maybe you'll go, but you'll still drink, but you won't eat.
It's kind of ill-defined.
It's very you can't really find a specific definition. What does it mean to fast? And there's a lot of that also, in Christianity, that is sort of like that. So this is sort of what you do, but it's kind of loose and vague, which I guess is kind of as you sort of find yourself in it. But I think that there's something to be said for having boundaries that are very well defined.
And then you have freedom a lot of freedom within those boundaries.
Right.
Maybe a way of thinking of Hanukkah is as it's about boundary setting. We're setting the boundaries of Judaism and Jewish life, not just against the Greeks, also internally. Part of the story of Hanukkah is as you mentioned in the letter, is within the Jewish people, sort of rooting out groups or paths of Jewish thought of people who wanted to Hellenize and wanted to be more like the Greeks and wanted to assimilate.
Right. I think the story of Matityahu and his standing up is that he reached a point where, okay, this is a boundary that I cannot cross and I can't let people cross, and we have to stand up against this because it's gotten too far. I think it is a story about boundary setting.
Where really sort of the Greek culture, for the most part, it didn't come in through violence.
Right.
It came in through, it was appealing. It had things to it that people really liked, and it sort of blurred the boundaries of the Jewish people and of Judaism and of Greek culture and Hellenism. And over time, the cultures were sort of starting to blur together. And it seems like the Maccabees stood up and said, if we let these boundaries blur too much, if we just let them blur indefinitely, they're just going to disappear. We're going to disappear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is some value in having contact and, exchanging ideas. And it kind of, I feel like I was writing about this recently, that I think the ideas of modern secularism and the way that we apply them to modern Orthodox Judaism is, it's sort of like Judaism brought these values to the world, and then the modern secularism is based on sort of a combination between Greek culture and Judeo-Christian values, which means, the values of Judaism about, equality and stuff like that I think were sort of expanded in modern secularism and then kind of reflected back into modern Orthodoxy, and that our struggle is kind of to filter which parts of that are acceptable and which parts are not. And I think that the fact that reflection happened is sort of part of what's supposed to happen. Like, I don't think we're supposed to stay completely within and not influence and be influenced by the outside world, but that it has to be within boundaries.
Thanks, Daniela. Hanukkah Sameach.
Hanukkah Sameach.
So, Letters to Giuseppe, as I introduced it in the previous podcast, it's a series of sort of open letters that Daniela writes to her friend Giuseppe, who's a what's the word? Not Spaniard. Catalan. God forbid that we should call a Catalan a Spaniard. He would stick a knife deep in our hearts. So he's a Catalan, and he's not Jewish, and he's sort of interested in Judaism, and he's a friend of yours. So you started writing these letters to him a long time ago, and at some point you decided to sort of make them open letters.
Yes.
So what is the idea with the blog? What do you want to do with it?
Well, I think one of the things that's good about the letters is that they're written to a friend, so they're not like dry, like this is what we do and this is what you should do. They're like, warm and friendly, and just like, me just explaining like this is what we do. And I think that makes it a lot more accessible to people. So basically, the letters are, explaining the basic aspects of Orthodox Jewish life, in a way that's like non-threatening and accessible. And, I try and make it funny, and I put in a lot of pictures.
Yeah, so you'll have to go to the website, to the blog, to see the pictures, because they really make a lot of the humor for a lot of the posts. One thing that I really appreciate about the blog is that, when I was a Baal Tshuva, someone who was becoming religious and was trying to learn about Jewish life and sort of what it looked like and I would look up in this great book called Book of Our Heritage, and it tells you sort of, on this day we do this and this, and we go to synagogue and we say this prayer and not that prayer. And then there were also sort of these kind of what I term kind of fluffy h.com type articles that talk about how wonderful the spiritual light of Hanukkah and whatever is, which is also true. But then there was this whole other aspect of Judaism that was like the actual lived experience. Like, what is it supposed to look like? What is it supposed to feel like? And I feel like Letters to Joseph really captures that.
Yeah, my most popular post is this post called 15 Weird Things Jews Do. And one of the ways I describe it was, these are 15 things that Jews do that you won't find in Book of Our Heritage. So I think that's really what you're talking about. It's like there are all these little strange nuances and stuff because living an observant Jewish life is a whole lifestyle. It's not just, a certain practice that you do at a certain time of day. It's like it's a whole culture, and it's very hard to capture in a book that's just about the different laws and this is what we do, because there's so much other stuff around it.
It's so funny you're putting it that way. You're saying it's this idea that Judaism is not just a religion, right? It's a people, a civilization, a culture. Maybe another way of saying what I was missing is that I was missing sort of the anthropology of Judaism, like the guy that goes out into the forest and doesn't just report on the dry facts of a theology and rules and whatever, but actually like the lived experience of people.
Right.
So your book is sort of the going out into the jungle version of Judaism.
Blog and
anthropological study.
Yes. So
Letters to Joseph is a blog. You can go check it out. It's at letterstojosep.com. That's Joseph, Josep, not Joseph, no H at the end. Letters to Joseph, I don't know what that is, but you'll probably end up on some Japanese porn site, so don't do it. Welcome to Happy Hour. On Sunday, I saw an article on Lubavitch.com. It really helps bring home for me what I really love about Chabad. I'm not a Chabadnik. The article reads, "Despite increased security fears, Chabad of Paris will go ahead with its annual public menorah lightings during Hanukkah. Following a series of terror attacks, in November, Paris police had discouraged local Chabad emissaries from conducting public Hanukkah celebrations and called for major lighting ceremonies to be canceled. Do you understand what's happening here? The French government does not feel that they can adequately protect a handful of Jews lighting candles in public from violent attack. In the middle of Paris, the capital of France." The article goes on. "But as a matter of principle, Chabad has always taken the position that shutting down its Jewish activities would be a capitulation to terror, a submission to darkness which the Hanukkah lights are intended to dispel. On Tuesday, Chabad delegates met with local officials to plan for safe and secure Hanukkah celebrations. 19 Chabad-led public menorah lightings to take place over the course of the 8-day holiday under heavy security. Once again, this year, the large menorah at the Eiffel Tower that has lit up the French capital for the past 25 years will be kindled against the Parisian skyline." This story really took me back to stories that I've heard from the bad old days of the USSR, when Jews were persecuted in the Soviet Union for practicing Judaism and basic religious teaching and rituals were basically illegal. There are so many stories of brave Chabad emissaries risking their lives to sneak a pair of tefillin or a Jewish prayer book into the evil empire. There are beautiful stories of Chabad helping to dig secret mikvaot, ritual baths, in the basements of buildings where women could do their monthly immersions so Jewish family life could go on, at least for some, according to Jewish law and tradition. When the modern Hellenists of the Soviet Empire outlawed circumcision, teaching Torah, mikvah, learning Hebrew, and other outward signs of Jewish religious life, Chabad was really the only major organ of Jewish life that kept the candle of Judaism burning in the vast expanses of the repressive communist regime. This is part of the message of Hanukkah, that no matter what our physical situation, no matter how oppressed, no matter the odds, God will not abandon his people, and we will not abandon him or our mission. Even in the face of the most powerful oppression, we will endeavor to fulfill our mission in the world, bringing God's light to the entire world. From the dark hole we are often cast into, the light of our faith, of our Torah, just glows that much brighter, and our few little candles can light up the darkness of all of creation. If you happen to find yourself in a city anywhere in the US or throughout Western Europe, or for that matter in Israel, during Hanukkah this year, go out and enjoy the light that these modern-day Maccabees are bringing to the public square. When doing Judaism in public really takes guts, Chabad is there. So yasher koach to them, a big congratulations, and a happy Hanukkah to everybody. And that's it for this episode of the Jewish Geography Podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you're liking what you're hearing, if you want to hear more of it, please go to rabbiaton.com and look for the podcast link at the top of the page. You can click there, find ways to subscribe. You can check out on iTunes, just search for Jewish Geography. Please, if you like the podcast, go on there, leave a review. It really helps get the podcast out to more people. Go ahead and share it. And above everything else, just have a great Hanukkah. Bring lots of light into the world. And please, God, I'll see you again next week.